And the recording is in progress.
Evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Shannon Ogden.
And I'm Ann Trujillo. First tonight, take a moment and picture your neighborhood. Now picture more than 80% of your neighborhood and your neighbors forced to move.
Well, the Metro's growth is forcing people out of one Denver neighborhood at a frightening pace. Liz Gilardi is live.
Hey, Mark, I see you. You popped in. How's it going? Good. Thanks for being here, checking it out.
Yes, you guys have some good programs, a lot of good content.
We try. I know Mark from Together Colorado, the work that we've been doing over there in their climate justice committee. So I can't hear this. Can anybody else?
Who's actually showing this? Who's sharing this video?
Bridget, aren't you sharing this video? You need to select sound for it.
What did you say?
Oh, this video doesn't have sound.
What?
We can't hear.
How bizarre. Oh no. Let's see. The sound is on at the bottom.
When you shared it, did you say share sound? So come back out and then share it again.
I'll come back out.
Come out and then we'll do share. And then there's a click little box in the corner when you do share screen that says optimize for sound and video.
Share sound.
Share sound. So click on that.
Thank you.
And then our sound should be working. Let's try it.
Okay.
And we will stay on top of that. Thank you, Liz. In fact, more than half of Globeville residents make less than $25,000.
So let's go on to the next one.
My dad is from Chihuahua, Mexico. My mom, her family, they've been here 5 generations. I've lived in this house, the house next door, and the triplex across the alley. So nobody has lived in this house except for our family. I was the first person in my family to graduate from high school. I went to Manual High School. I have a bachelor's from DU, and then my master's is from DU as well. Having been the first to graduate from high school, having had the opportunity to be a homeowner in this space, it has created a love for this community that I think is what drives me to fight for this community. A lot of people who live in these spaces, a historically immigrant community, they didn't have access to own land in other spaces. The history of redlining, activism around a smelter town, the history of railroads and transportation and work I think are really important to how these neighborhoods evolved and how they're affected by government and policy. I think one of the weaknesses is that we don't have a super politically engaged community. And I think that's historically been a challenge for us because when people fought back, it didn't work. And so I think it discouraged people from continuing to fight back. A lot of us come from immigrant families. Most of us don't trust the government. There's not a lot of incentive to interact or engage with government because they're actively erasing this neighborhood. The expansion and National Western have wiped out over 5% of our residences. When I-70 was put in, it wiped out our main street where we had diversity of economic opportunities. I feel like a lot of people think that the problems are too big to fight or they don't quite understand the problems. My fear is that when people finally understand, it'll be too late. Too late is when there's not enough of us left to make it worth fighting for. My dad is from Chihuahua.
Having asthma is not nice because you have limited things to do before your lungs want to give out on you. It limits everything you basically do. You can't run for a long period of time. You can't do any fun activities because it stops you. I've had asthma for 13 years, my whole life basically. Having an asthma attack it doesn't feel nice. It feels like your air span is like a penny size. It feels like you're choking on nothing because you can't breathe in. You start getting wheezy and dizzy. You feel like you're gonna faint because you have no air in you. It kind of feels like there's a snake around your chest.
Air pollution can cause and promote the development of asthma. So we know that lifetime exposure or lots of exposure when you're young can make you more likely to get asthma. Air pollution can also make people have less developed lungs. So if you look at people who grow up near highways, they on average, a percentage of them will have less lung function as adults. It's well established that traffic and different forms of industrial pollution, generally not just specific to the Swansea area, that people who live near sources of pollution are going to get higher exposure. So we know that diesel truck pollution, if there's enough of it, that you're going to have much higher levels right around where those trucks are, so you're going to have much higher effects. There's a lot of issues with the construction. Obviously a lot of efforts are made to mitigate the effects in terms of trying to mitigate dust, trying to mitigate all the features of having a construction site. But at the end of the day, you're driving more trucks, you're pulverizing concrete. There's a whole variety of activities associated with construction to clearly reduce air quality.
Every year our school has a field day. I have to step away from that because I start getting wheezy. I can't breathe. I feel really dizzy. So I have to step away from that and just sit down the rest of the time.
Is anybody talking? I don't hear anything.
Nope, no
Nope.
action.
It's because we're all
Watching.
muted.
Yeah, we were watching some videos until everybody could gather and get here. So shall we get started? Rachel?
Hey, So today there's a couple of things that we're going to accomplish. The first thing that we want to do is have Chuck talk to us a little bit about the Pepsi plant and just kind of what that looks like as far as OUs are concerned and where we're at in our Superfund. So Chuck's going to do that, and then we're going to have the agencies talk out, and then we're going to do some talking about our next speaker and kind of what we want to understand and what we want to learn. So I guess we'll have Chuck go ahead and take it away.
All right, can people hear me?
Yeah,
Wait a minute,
loud and clear.
just a second. Okay, so we have a brief introduction to Chuck first, Rachel. It's just to introduce the subject.
Does anybody not know who Chuck is? Let's start there, because I'm looking around the room and I think a lot of people know him. If you don't, raise your hand and he's our technical advisor and gives us lots of great information and has done so. And oftentimes, and has done a really nice job of coming to us and explaining what's going on. Yeah. Chuck, do you want to say anything else about yourself that is relevant, that you want us to know? Do you like long walks on the beach? You can tell us that if you want.
I can't see who's there. I know a lot of you have listened to me opine about a variety of things over the last couple of years, but if somebody feels the need for an introduction, I'll let them do it.
So Rachel, do you want to do the introduction before Chuck starts talking to tell people what we're talking about?
We're talking about the Pepsi plant being sold and how that affects our Superfunds and our OUs. And so Chuck's going to talk about that.
All right, I'll go ahead and take it from here then.
Please do.
I've got a few slides here, PowerPoints that I believe the runner of the Zoom meeting is going to be able to show them to you so that you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. I mentioned the Pepsi Center, or not the Pepsi Center, but the Pepsi property at the CAG meeting a month ago, and that I had heard it was for sale, and I wanted to call it to the attention of the CAG because a good part of the Pepsi property that is up for sale, probably about half of it at least, is within Operable Unit 2 of the Superfund site, which is normally considered the parking lots of the Coliseum and the Gloveville Landing Park, and then just kind of collectively some other areas adjacent to those two areas. But certainly from a property standpoint, except for City and County of Denver, the Pepsi property is one of the biggest blocks of property in Operable Unit 2. I am of the opinion that assessing contamination and responding to contamination through the Superfund site at least holds some chance of being able to have something significantly done. But in lieu of having something significantly done, at least it is more easily that what's done is visibly done than if that property goes through a program like the VCUP program. And I cautioned the CAG that it would not surprise me, given a lot of histories that have been involved on this site or in other areas in city and county of Denver, that there would be an attempt to move these properties out of OU2 and use an alternative method of dealing with on-site contamination, particularly probably VCUP, that's Voluntary Cleanup Program. Subsequent to those comments, I've had a number of conversations where people wanted a little bit more about what the Pepsi property is, where it is, where it fits in to OU2, just so that the members of the CAG have a better context in what how to look at my comments from a month ago. So the first slide I have is from the Remedial Investigation report that was originally done back 2009, I think, and work done prior to that. But it's figure 3 of that Remedial Investigation report that shows the outline of the operable unit as it was defined at that point. It shows the Coliseum sitting on the boundary of the northeast side of the Operable Unit 2. It shows the northern and northwestern parts as being properties owned largely by City and County of Denver. And it shows to the south and to the southeast a series of industrial parcels owned by a number of different entities, and particularly the southern and southeastern ones are labeled the Bottling Group LLC, which is the Pepsi bottling properties that are within Operable Unit 2. Now, I've added to that figure 3 of the remedial investigation, a green dot kind of in the south central part of the Operable Unit outline that represents the pink, okay, that represents the approximate location of the large exhaust stack from the old smelter that was on this property. The Omaha Grant smelter stack. It ended up well over 300 feet tall and was one of the highest points for a while west of the Mississippi River. The other things I did was outline in, I guess, pink or magenta, the 38th Street that runs along the south side of the Pepsi property on the west, and I similarly highlighted Brighton Boulevard that runs along the east side on a northeast-southwest orientation, which marks kind of the boundaries of the Pepsi property outside of the Operable Unit 2. And those two streets, 38th and Brighton Boulevard, I will have also added to these other slides to help orient you to those slides because they are of different scales and different displays, and not all of them have the Operable Unit outlined on them. So those are both on the south corner of OU2 those mark the edge of the Pepsi properties, but they also help you reference other figures that are here. So that gives you an idea of the distribution of Pepsi properties within OU2, and also an approximate location of where their properties are outside of OU2.
How many acres?
I think Pepsi has about 30 acres altogether, and about half of that is inside the boundaries of OU2, and half of it is outside the boundaries of OU2. But all of it, it's my understanding, is for sale. The next figure is figure 4 from the remedial investigation. Again, I've tried to highlight 38th Street down at the lower left side and Brighton Boulevard along the southeast side of OU2. I've again highlighted, and on the remedial investigation map, they have located where the smelter stack was, just as kind of being a dramatic point of the smelter property. This figure also has on it, and I would suggest that you go to the remedial investigation and look at this figure as reproduced for it, because that gives you the best opportunity to see some lines that describe different parts of the smelter complex. It's referred to as being a smelter, but it really was a whole series of smelters, a whole series of chimneys. It had a major ore separating smelter that almost all of the refined products went through, but there was a great deal of work and a great variety of wastes being produced all over this complex, not just what was being produced by the smelter that was using that big long stack. And that's something that needs to be recognized in attempting to assess what wastes might be here and in what form they might be. On this figure is shown a broad pink area and a little pink comma that is called slag or smelter slag. That is the location of a pile of slag stacked up well above ground level that was purchased by City and County of Denver from a SARCO back in 1918. The purchase of that smelter was for Denver to use that material in a variety of applications. A lot of it went into fill of roadways. Some of it went into asphaltic pavements for roadways. Some of it was sold by City and County of Denver for profit. But those two pink blobs are what the remedial investigation felt to be the areas that were significant to mention with respect to the disposal of smelter wastes and slag in the 2009 remedial investigation. And you'll see that those are basically north and northwest of the stack, and only on City and County of Denver properties. And that was the consideration that was given to them in the remedial investigation. Now, the next
When did
figure,
Pepsi build that plant?
pardon?
When did Pepsi put the plant on the property?
I'm not sure when that construction was done. I think it was probably in the 50s. But to be honest, I'm not aware for sure of when properties were sold to. Well, the first sales were not to Pepsi. The first sales were for a munitions and powder company before Pepsi came in. So they've gone through other industries besides Pepsi, which of course need to be evaluated for what those properties may have contributed to the contamination levels on OU2. But they would have come in after 1920 and certainly before the construction of the Coliseum circa 1950-51. The powder company, explosives and powder company, was in, if you go back to figure figure 3, the first figure I had, there is on a kind of an almost triangular piece of Pepsi bottling property, 2.66 acres on the westernmost of the southern tips of OU2. That property was the explosives and powder company. I think their name may have been Imperial, but I don't know. There are maps that describe when Denver sold the property to that company, and also there's deeds that tell when Pepsi acquired the property as well. The next map is a map zooming in that was done, I believe, the original copy of the map that is in the administrative record is not dated. But this map and the next one appear to be the same vintage and the same type of mapping, and the other one is dated in 2018. So I think this is probably
we're on slide 3 now.
Pardon?
We're on slide 3 now.
Yes.
Thank you.
So this is probably a 1918 map. It is zoomed in closer, and I have highlighted where the stack, the big smokestack, is located on this. So this set of land is west of the stack. Near the top of the map, there is a line that I have some arrows to that say toe of the slag pile. So this area is south and southwest of the pink blob that the Remedial Investigation acknowledged was an area of slag left by the smelter. But this lies south and southwestward of that pink area, and these are contours of the top of the land surface where slag is the material at the land surface. So whether this at one time was a pile of slag and had been taken down to essentially a rough land surface, how deep it goes beneath this surface we don't know, but we do know from contemporary mapping that slag was at the ground surface at that time, and it needs to be determined, if it can be, where that slag went and what its extent may still be, or what's happened to it since 1918.
So if the Pepsi plant was over it and it's concrete, and the concrete covers some slag, there wouldn't be any possibility that we're getting cadmium and arsenic and lead in our Pepsi, right?
Certainly the footprint of any
encapsulate. Yeah, sorry.
A building that has a roof as well as a concrete bottom and doesn't have in-building infiltration disposal of wastes. We're talking about industries that existed at a time period when things called dry wells and things like that were not uncommon, where instead of dumping wastes into a storm sewer and draining it into the river directly, if you were above the water table, you might have within your building something called a dry well, where you just disposed of your liquid wastes by dumping them into the dry well. So you can't count on the existence during the 20s, 30s, 40s, even into the 50s. You can't count on the existence of an industrial building as being no opportunity for groundwater contamination. Now, the building will protect you from windblown dust that might still be on the land, but the soils that are under that building are of issue if that building is taken out and development is done that involves exposing or digging into the sediments that are beneath the building.
Chuck, I just
So you
it
can
might
see
be
from
best
this,
to keep it might be best to keep the building and then build on top of it.
that would be one way of dealing with it. It would greatly probably limit your choices of development if you do that. But it certainly what is shown on this topographic map, the land surface in 1918, any of the material at this surface that is still there under a building is above the water table and would not be subject to infiltrating precipitation. And if you left the bottom of the building in place, then you would not expose these sediments at the time you constructed on top of that base. I put on a little...
Real quickly, we have about 10 more minutes. I think then we'll, because I know our agency reports are pretty brief this time. We have a question from Joan, and then also Christine wants to better understand how the contour lines affect the slag and those issues. So do you want to handle Christine's, and then Joan, please ask your question?
Well, actually, I would prefer to hold the questions right now until I finish, okay, and then have the questions on all of them, because I'm clearly getting behind right now. So this is a property that's south and west of the acknowledged slag in the remedial investigation that documents that slag was there in 1918 that needs to be still addressed. It needs to be addressed in the remedial investigation. It needs to be addressed in any sales, new ownership, and development on the Pepsi property, because most of this land on this map is under the Pepsi property. The next figure is a similar, and on this one, before we go on, I also have highlighted Brighton Boulevard, where it would be on this map, as well as 38th. The next map
Slide
is...
4?
Yes, slide 4. is the is the parcel just southwest of the contour map that was shown before. This is the one that shows that the mapping date as being May 1st of 1918. And this is another parcel. It's between 41st Street and south of 40th Street. We don't know how much further south of 40th Street it goes. This too has the slag shown in the upper left corner of it. And if you look at the north arrow in the legend, you'll see that this is not oriented north-south. It's oriented northeast-southwest. So to get the same picture, reference is for Brighton Boulevard, which back then was called Waywater Street, and where 38th would be, you need to rotate the page. But in this case, Brighton Boulevard is north-south. And so this is the property south of the stack and between the stack and parallel to Brighton Boulevard. And it again represents the contour labels, the topography, the land surface of the slag that was placed in this parcel. And this parcel is largely under Pepsi property. It goes somewhat north of the Pepsi property as well. The last figure, figure 5, is an entirely different view to it, and that's because this is a black and white aerial photograph that was taken in 1932. So this is 10, 12 years after those other pictures were taken. And it has Brighton Boulevard shown on it. I have put the location of the smokestack, which is still there at that time. In fact, you can see the big black shadow of the smokestack pointing off to the northeast on this one. Brighton Boulevard is there, and the approximate location of 38th is down in the very left-hand corner of this figure. You can tell, looking at this and following where the smokestack is pointing, that kind of big black pillar that's pointing to the northeast, there is a kind of a strange shaped pattern outline there of a kind of featureless area with a white area in the middle of it. That is where at least part of the slag pile that the city and county of Denver bought, and it is now no longer topography above the ground surface. It has been mined down below water table, and it's full of water, except for an island that's sticking out in the middle of this pond or lake right now. That is the depression, the hole, that subsequently, between 1932 and 1950-52, when the Coliseum was built, that was filled with municipal waste that has partially been removed when the Globeville construction was done for the drainage, and is partially still in place and needs to be characterized as part of a new remedial investigation of Operable Unit 2. So that's what happened to the big pile. It was mined, but that slag had been put in what was known to be a gravel pit anyway, so they just mined the slag out down to the bottom of the old gravel pit. There's a fire truck going by. I hope it doesn't interfere too much with what I'm saying. To the left of the shadow of the stack, you can see roads are being built, and various kinds of patterns are showing up on that plot of land, indicating that some development is underway there. And if you look to the right of the stack, there is a long ribbon of white and gray stripes, kind of a candy striped area that is showing development of that piece of property, and that is the type of pattern you might expect if someone is filling a hillside or filling an area to bring it up to level to allow development on that.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt you really quick.
I don't know, can you hear me over the sirens, or should I hold up a minute?
We can hear you over the sirens, but with the cursor, would it be possible, Bridget, if you could show us like what it is that he's talking about, what area where he's talking about? Yeah, if that's okay. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Can you see my cursor? He's talking, he's talking about the area to the right, like a long ribbon with
Like a-
striations in it.
Like a snake with
right
stripes.
green dot, stripes. Go ahead, Chuck.
He's probably waiting for the fire truck to pass by.
While we wait, I could show you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, now I can hear you.
Somehow I got muted. Anyway, yes, Bridget, if you can show them the candy striped piece of land that is immediately east of the stack and runs up to the northeast.
Can you see my cursor? Rachel?
Yes, it's very faint. It's black, so it's very faint, but we can see it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so this one is showing intermediate levels of development, including large-scale infill of parts of the property on within the boundaries of OU2. And this area that runs, that's east of the stack and runs northeast, includes areas under other properties other than just Pepsi within OU2. Part of the Forney Museum would superimpose over this. And so that borings that are put into this area that are looking for evidence of only smelter wastes and only smelter contaminants may be grossly missing what that fill has in it. And that's a critical part, just as analyzing the wastes of the landfill predominantly for lead and arsenic misses the point, because those wastes are not smelter wastes. They're OU2 wastes. They affect OU2. They may affect properties outside of OU2. And similarly, this waste needs to be evaluated for what it is, so that we know what kind of waste contaminants need to be looked for. And for instance, some of the highly contaminated wastes that are detected in the Pepsi wastes where they looked only for lead and arsenic, may be related to this waste that has been introduced since 1918 and are unrelated to smelters and to the smelter at OU2, and may not be adequately evaluated even within the OU2 boundary. Okay, I will take some questions now if people have them.
Chuck?
Thanks, Chuck.
You can skip my question because I know we're out of time. I just think it's critical that this not be swept into another V cup. We already had an emergency TICRA, quote unquote, time critical, and we're going to get, but I don't want to ask my question now because of time and getting ready for our speaker.
No, we're not going to have the speaker tonight. We're just talking about her. So you can ask your question.
Oh, okay.
Please, Christine, go ahead.
I didn't understand the significance, just the significance of the sort of the contour lines right around the green dot, right around the smelter that were concentrated sort of in a semicircle. I missed why it was important.
Those contour lines, the smelter stack is there only for geographical reference. The point that's being driven home, and it is a point that was cursorily discussed in the scoping document, is that the discussion of the extent of smelter wastes as they affected the site in 1918 in the original remedial investigation are inadequate, that it's clear that the smelter wastes extend over a bigger area than that. And I showed a couple of 1918 maps to help visualize how big an area was acknowledged back in 1918 as covering, as having slag disposed on them. Probably 3 times the area that the 2009 remedial investigation seriously looked at.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
So I would just like to, flip back just to talk about the extent of the potential toxic pollution at that site. The EPA action levels in OU1 were arsenic 70 parts per million and lead 400 parts per million. And the highest arsenic found at the Pepsi site was 1,500 parts per million and lead 100,000 parts per million. So we're not talking about small potatoes.
Not even a little bit. Oh, but I mean, it's significant. Joan, what's your question? Go ahead. Oh, go ahead. I don't know if you're unmuted. I think you're good now.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yep, you're good to go.
I was just interested in a serious timeline to take a look at what we're looking at here with a 2009 remedial investigation that was done and what the conclusion was even at that time. There have been several remedial investigations that have been done and completed with several groups that had been involved. CDPHE had been involved prior to this, but I don't think it was OU2 they were specifically looking at the time. But so a timeline is very important. And I think the fact that we first began with this particular site in certainly CDPHE had been looking and reviewing, et cetera. But in 1998, Pepsi went from being, they leased the property, and just before it became a Superfund site, they bought the property in 1999. There had been discussion about did Pepsi know the land was contaminated before they bought this property? And I will say to you that Celia Vanderloop said, yes, Pepsi knew this property was contaminated, and she will repeat it, but EPA had questioned, did they know? So when we see that there have been there's been remedial investigation in 2001, which I didn't even know about, but Pepsi had been actively involved in investigating. Walsh had been investigating. CH2M Hill had been investigating. In 2004, Enviro Group, there have been so much investigation of this site. And at this point, someone said, well, if you leave the buildings on top, that's kind of what the new situation is for me that I have a problem with, is that's called revitalization now. We can't spend money to clean it up. And I think that happened, and this is my opinion, that we didn't clean up a Sarco globe, and we have major development on there that's been approved, and I guess it's stable now. But so in this situation, what did Pepsi know? Why was there so much investigation even by Pepsi at the time? And they did find 100,000 parts per million of lead. I saw a map, and I don't have access to it now, that indicated it was on the southern part of Pepsi's property, and it was an incinerator. So I don't know. I can see where Chuck is pointing out to the actual smelter at the top, or that's where they had the brick tall 352 foot stack. But there was an incinerator on this site. So, but you had a lot of smelters, slag boilers, et cetera. So there's a lot of waste, I'm sure, underneath Pepsi. But at this point, we really haven't discussed that. In the entire time we've looked at OU2, but except the investigations that have gone on prior to EPA or prior to us as an OU2 and a CAG understanding this, there have been 13 investigations since 1998, 99, and we're now in 2021. So that I have a problem with that, and it'll pretty much, will it boil down to Pepsi saying they didn't know or they did know? They did move some waste at some point. And I know Fonda had sent an email out saying that he had read some data, but he didn't keep the data. And it'd be really interesting to see, what did Pepsi know and when did they know it? And what was the 100,000 parts per million of lead? Did they remove that, or did they build on top of that as well? So it'll be interesting.
Hi, this is Adrian. I have a question for you, Joan, because you brought it up. It's kind of interesting that you brought up those environmental groups. And I'm assuming that they did analysis over the period of time. Did we ever get any data, or can we get any data for that analysis?
We were filing freedom of information to get data. EPA didn't actively copy a lot of data, and so it's hard copy. So I really can't answer that. I just know that they report in the remedial investigation. There's been, like I said, in this last remedial investigation, which is kind of interesting, on why didn't we move on that particular operable unit and investigation, because Denver has had several proposals, and at one point it was just going to be a landfill. Then they did another, I don't quite understand the process and the follow-up, but they were going to build on OU2, and they were interested in building multi-use development properties at that time. And then they didn't do it because there was a concern with contamination for a pregnant woman. And then but they've changed their what they wanted to do with the property many times. So they've done many remedial investigations. So do we have data on it? If we look at all of these studies that were done by, Pepsi was in there studying it, and we had just many.
Those groups you mentioned are environmental groups, and they typically do environmental analysis. So
Denver should have it. I apologize, Adrian. Denver should have this data. And,
Adrian, if I could step in,
Sure.
If I could step in here, this is Chuck. Most of what Joan was referring to are contractors that were working for the highway department or for the city or for a industrial entity. They were not doing it as environmental groups. They were contractors. The data has been reported as thoroughly compiled, standardized in terms of its format, and put into a relational database by EPA. And EPA provided that to the CAG at one time. I downloaded it. I unfortunately don't have the software, the operating system that allows me to open it, examine it, assess it. So it's a proprietary relational database that EPA has put together, and maybe somebody that's better than I am can get it open and answer it. But the answer to your question is, it has been represented that all of that information is available and is in that database.
Is
I
that
just
soil
can't
and
verify
water,
it.
Chuck? Is that soil and
I believe
groundwater,
it's, yes, both soil and groundwater, and I think surface water.
Oh, well, what I wanted to say to Adrian was that there was a Pepsi investigation. They've definitely done several investigations themselves, but they hired Transportation and Industrial Services to perform 6 investigations for them to assess the concentrations of arsenic and lead in soils that would be removed as part of the expansion of the Pepsi bottling facility. Soil samples were collected and analyzed to determine the property disposition of soil excavated from the Pepsi property. So there have been a lot of investigations by Pepsi. They have removed some, but I'm really interested on how they got the soil sampling of 100,000 parts per million of lead and what they did with that. That just didn't go to a landfill.
That sample, Joan, came from a water well that they put in, and it was a soil sample from the boring of that well at, I don't remember whether it was 14 feet or 18 feet below the surface, but it was not related to any surface hole that was dug, and I don't believe there was any excavation in that area. So except for the few grams of soil that were sent, that's really beyond the fact we know how severe it was. We don't have any idea of how much of that material there was or its distribution.
Exactly. We don't know. How did
just
they
to
got
put
the
the-
100,000 parts per million? What is quite interesting.
But-
But as I said, I showed that they're in that area where that soil sampling was found, that there was an incinerator, and it was on the southern part of the OU2.
But just to put into context, that's a truckload of lead. That's a massive amount of lead. If anybody, that's like 100 grams per.
It's 10%, 10% lead.
Yeah, it's like a mine. It's like a lead mine. It's it's a massive amount. It's huge. And is it still there? We don't know, right?
We don't know.
Well, they drilled through it when they advanced that well. There was no additional drilling that I'm aware of in an attempt to document how big a mass it was. It is a staggering amount. Most of the Pepsi wells were not really specific samples. They just are attributed to a 10-foot interval or in some cases, I think a 20-foot interval, a composite, apparently, of everything that the boring went through for over a 10-foot mixed together and averaged. So it would be one of the few times where you actually have a grab sample of a specific soil sample as opposed to an averaged composite. which calls into question if you've got a 10-foot composite that gives you 1,500 parts per million arsenic, what was averaged to give you that number? Any other questions?
Went blank for a while for me, sorry. No, thank you, Chuck. I think maybe if the end of the meeting, if the other folks have more questions, we can kind of follow up there. But seems like a perfect time for Jesse Fonda to be here with us to talk about these things for sure. So let's go ahead and get Jesse to share out what the plans are for the Pepsi site on their end. Jesse?
Hello, good night.
Hello.
If you can just go back to the first slide from Chuck, the one that shows the facilities, the whole site. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. Just to go back a little bit in the investigation process, the remedial investigation. We had a remedial investigation initial report done in 2009. There's been several contractors, as Chuck pointed out, that don't work for EPA, but there's also been investigations done by other groups for their own purposes. So it's not that we've had a lot of different remedial investigations. We have one, and that occur in different chunks. The other part is that the remedial investigation is looking at all the different types of properties, and the boundaries of a Superfund are not set until a record of decision is made. So what we have is this initial boundary that you see in the white and black stripe line. The Pepsi property is...
Wait, can you slow down? You talk
Sure.
so fast.
Sorry
Thank
about
you.
that. Yeah. The remedial investigation, the stripe line, the black and white stripe line, is our initial focus on the sampling, but the actual boundaries of the Superfund is not set until we have a record decision. We are not there yet. As our investigation continues, the lines of that you see, the black and white line that you see there, can contract or expand based on the information that we get. The statement of work that we share with you had a couple of sampling points or locations that shows where we are going to sample to continue this investigation. And you'll see that there are, I think, 2 sampling points that are just outside along that pinkish line that Chuck marked on those 2 streets. The site of the Pepsi property is part of the investigation just because they're selling the property. That doesn't change the fact that whoever owns the property will be, the property will be part of the investigation. It's not whoever owns, it's that the property is part of the investigation. Doesn't matter who owns it. The VCUPS process is a process that happens for sites that are not Superfund. And in this case, because this is a Superfund, the VCUP doesn't apply to it. So generally, the site will continue to be part of our investigation. It's actually part of the investigation, the second phase of the sampling that we're going to do. So I see that you guys are worried that somehow this would be left behind, but it's not going to be left behind. This is going to be part of the sampling.
Fonda, can you repeat the last part that you said after the VCUP?
That the VCUP is for sites that are not part of the Superfund. Was that it?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a little bit around there. I was just noticing that we had a Spanish speaker on the line, and I was asking if she had somebody that was translating for her and her end. So I got kind of lost on when you were talking about it being that it's still under investigation, but something about V cup in
Ok.
that area.
Para la persona que habla español, yo hablo español, puedes sentirte cómoda en simplemente preguntarme y hablarme en español. Yo te puedo responder.
Let me ask. María, ¿está allí?
Sí, ya dirá.
Ok, ¿quiere preguntarle algo a él? No sé si está alguien traduciéndole allá por su lado o
No, no hay nadie traduciendo.
Sí, es que no tenemos traductora
Ok.
para el CAGA en este momento.
¿Está
Bueno,
hablando de la construcción que va a haber en la Pepsi?
no, de la investigación.
De la tierra, de la contaminación que está abajo de la tierra del Pepsi.
Sí.
Ok.
Yo le puedo dar un resumen bien cortito si quiere y le puedo pasar mi información si quiere después luego hablar conmigo.
Claro que sí,
Bien.
me gustaría.
Sí, Fonda.
Ok.
But wait,
Gracias.
hold on a second, just so I can let the English speakers know. We're just going to give Maria a quick update of what it is that we're talking about with the land and the contamination that is there. Everybody else that's on the line. Okay, Fonda, go ahead.
Ok. Bueno, doña María, aquí este espacio es lo que nosotros conocemos como la unidad operacional número 2. ¿Y usted está viendo la presentación?
Sí.
Sí, ok. Fíjese en la línea blanca y negra. Esa línea blanca y negra es lo que nosotros estamos llamando, eso que usted ve de 16 OU2. Eso es el área de investigación. En el pasado, esto era una de las fundiciones de metales de aquí de Denver y CERCLA, ¿verdad? Que es la ley con la que trabaja con esto, que es la ley de Superfund, pues encontró que había una contaminación y está buscando la investigación para que se atienda a la limpieza. Y en este caso, la preocupación del grupo es que la propiedad de Pepsi está a la venta y que de alguna forma podría quedarse fuera de la investigación luego de la venta. Y lo que yo estoy mencionándole es que el proceso de investigación no le importa quién es el dueño. La investigación continúa e incluye esa propiedad aún luego de que Pepsi la venda. ¿Ok?
¿La tierra de quién es? ¿Esto ya de la Pepsi ya no es o sí?
No, yo no sé eso. Yo no sé dónde
¿Quiénes
está ese
están
proceso.
haciendo la investigación?
La investigación la está haciendo la ciudad y el condado de Denver.
Okay.
Ellos son en el proceso de nosotros, ellos son los responsables de la investigación y de la limpieza al final. Así que ahora mismo la EPA le manda a Denver a hacer una investigación, ¿verdad? Nosotros tenemos nuestros parámetros y le decimos, vas a investigar de esta forma. Y en ese proceso se determina hasta dónde llega el contaminante. Luego, en la próxima parte del proceso, que nosotros llamamos el estudio de la tecnología, evaluamos diferentes formas de limpiarlo. Y después de eso, hay un proceso de participación pública para entonces brincar al récord de decisión que dice, el sitio contaminado es este, los contaminantes son estos y se va a limpiar de esta forma. Y de ahí en adelante, entonces Denver se encarga de la limpieza.
Ok, gracias.
Seguro.
So Fonda, am I to understand then what you're saying, not Fonda, I'm sorry, Jesse, that the portion of the Pepsi that is in the Superfund site is going to stay in the Superfund site and be remediated under the Superfund laws and will not go to private hands to a V cup?
Exactly.
So, but you did say that the lines could change on OU2. What if, is there a possibility that the line could change to exclude the Pepsi property?
It could expand or it could contract. It really depends on the investigation.
So how can you say then that the Pepsi site will not be handed over to VCUP, to private parties?
VCUP is only available to sites that are not Superfund. So this is part of the Superfund, so it's not available to it.
Okay, thank you.
Just to clarify, and you may have answered this when you spoke to Maria in Spanish and I missed it. And it's sort of what Bridget asked, but just let me clarify. Since the Pepsi site is partly in the way we think of OU2 currently and partly not in it, are you gathering the data from the part near 38th that is not technically part of a Superfund site? Are you including that data in your remedial investigation so that if it makes sense, you would draw the lines to include all of the Pepsi site?
Yeah, you see that pinkish line towards the bottom of the page. If I remember right, there is one sampling location on each side out there.
One in that entire area between the black dotted line and the pink dotted line? Well, that's not sufficient. Then you're not including most of the Pepsi site or a good portion of it in the remedial investigation.
In this portion of the sampling, we're collecting one sampling point, and then on the second phase, we're going to be collecting more samples within the Pepsi property. So what you're saying, so you're saying is that there is not enough samples, and what I'm saying is we are going to collect more samples later on.
Okay.
We are not going to collect everything right now. The first phase, this first sampling approach that we're going to do right now is going to be there, and then we're going to collect more samples, because exactly what you guys are bringing here, that there are some concentrations within the Pepsi property that were collected mostly during construction projects. It gives us an idea, it tells us that there is some contamination there. And during the statement of work development, that is information that I brought to Denver, and we're going to collect more information, but in the second phase of sampling.
So are you willing, and maybe this is a question for Fonda, are you willing to assure us that this will not move based on these samplings into a V cup no matter what?
It's just that V cups is CERCLA doesn't, V cups is not available for CERCLA sites. It's just the way it works.
It is
more.
And let me kind of clarify a little bit.
Fonda can tell you better.
Let me clarify a little bit. So under the voluntary cleanup program, the way it works is we only deal with sites that are outside of a regulated community. So in other words, if it's a RCRA site, it can't come to us. If it's underground storage tank, if it's a Superfund site, if it's solid waste, it cannot come into us. And that's the reason why we have that exclusion is for these things. It was not set up for areas where there are already regulated authorities that dictate what you have to do. So the chances of this going under the voluntary cleanup program, I could never say never, never, but the possibility is a very, very, very low percentage of it ever coming into there. It would have to be based upon sampling criteria and stuff like that that's being performed as part of the remedial investigation before that happens. Now, having said that, what happens between now and someone buying the property, I have no idea who's going to buy the property, why they're going to buy the property, everything else. So a lot of that's up in the air. So a lot of these conversations we have is premature in the sense that we know we have to investigate this. It has to be looked at further. But coming to the VCUP program right now, it can't.
Okay, thank you for entertaining my question. I still am afraid that there'll be pressure, and since we can't be involved in any of the RI process.
Let me ask you this, Christine. Why do you think the state would want to put this in the voluntary cleanup program to cause a problem?
I don't think it would cause a problem.
You don't think it would cause a problem for the state?
No, there's tons of V cups going on all along the Platte River with private property. You know that.
I understand that.
That's
because these are properties that are under a regulated authority. These have to do with real estate transactions, things like that. Is there cleanup involved? Absolutely.
Pepsi is split. What if they sell it as two properties? I'm just trying to guarantee that you look at the entire thing down to 38th, which is really where we were led to believe, the contamination would go that far under Pepsi. So
The thing is, even if it does, it's, like I said, there's no reason for us to split this up as far as if the property gets sold in two properties, even if it is the portion outside of it, you'd probably keep it until the ROD is written. It would be considered to be part of the Superfund and the state would not step inside of it.
So I think that our concern is that, and not to be disrespectful, but EPA did grant Denver a time critical removal permit to go in when most reasonable people would have been surprised that they got that permission from EPA. And what we're concerned about is the political pressure that will be brought to bear by Denver, who is the big dog in the group, I guess. The political pressure that could be brought to bear against CDPHE and EPA. And we suspect that that's happened in the past. And so that's honestly what our concern is. So.
Joan, you had your hand up. Will you please go ahead and
Thanks.
ask your question?
I guess I've had from the very beginning, and it would be really nice to have an explanation as to how did Pepsi buy this property and not know it was contaminated. Denver sold this property to Pepsi, and Pepsi said they did not know when they leased this property. So I have a problem, and Union Pacific sued ASARCO in this whole situation here because Union Pacific had rail lines moving a lot of waste in and out. And they claimed, I think the lawsuit was lost because of the timing of the lawsuit, but they claimed that groundwater was contaminated. They used slag for that railroad to raise it up, and there's documentation on that. But I have a thought about, here we have the Pepsi bottling group. And if you look at the Superfund site, and I always said this from the beginning, you see the legend on the left-hand side where they identify who the owners of land in that OU2 are. We've got Union Pacific, Forney, Hunt, Bruce. You see that City and County of Denver, Pepsi, the bottling group. And I don't know what year this is, but it still bothers me that there was this issue with Pepsi saying we didn't know. And I really believe that that's where we begin. Why didn't they know? CDPHE was in, or are they, I don't think, Fonda, CDPHE was in into OU2 doing any sampling, correct? You were looking at OU1.
I did the original phase, I mean, as far as the RI for the property, that's what we expanded outside of the SARC, and that was 98, 99. So you have to understand.
No, were you in OU2?
No, we didn't go to OU2. It was basically outside of that because that wasn't our purpose. We were trying to find residential properties. We were going into residential areas and there was no residential area here. So, but you have to understand one other thing too, is it doesn't matter if Pepsi knew or didn't know, okay? They know now, anyone buying this property will know, and they'll have to sit there and deal with this somehow. But look at exposure pathways, make sure they're incomplete and everything else. So they're going to have to still abide by the terms of the ROD if the ROD is written, and they'll have to take care of that. But you know, we have no idea what's going to happen. Anything we talk about now is just speculation on our part.
Right,
I mean, this
the
just happened
liability
less than a
then
month,
becomes an issue.
and I have got no idea what's going to happen.
Well, I'd be concerned if I was Pepsi and I'd, to begin to unearth finding that there was contamination here, Forney Museum, any of these others. But, you were saying there'd never been another remedial investigation. And I just find that if the citizens did a citizens timeline of what they've seen happening at this site, there was a remedial investigation done in 2001. Did you know that? That's why I said, well, was it only, are you saying I don't see where City and County of, I don't see where, I don't see in 2001, it said that it was completed by the PRPs and that EPA oversaw the 2001. So that was before even 2009. There's just been so many things. Denver has changed their mind so many times about what they want to do with this property. And that's why it is now 20 how many, 12 years since that remedial investigation that you mentioned, but we're talking since 1999 that this has been an EPA national priority site that we are, in now 2021, 22 years later, we're now looking at this property. I'm not going to defend Pepsi, but I'd sure, if I was Pepsi, I'd be furious to find out that there was this much contamination, and why would they know? Why would they know?
Thank you, John.
Well, they knew in 2000 about it because they were expanding at that time, and they came to us about trying to figure out, how do they dispose of these soils that they're encountering effectively. And they worked with me and the solid waste program to profile it and to send it off site. And that was done they wanted to make sure it was done correctly. But, the point being is, it doesn't matter what they knew. They own the property. Anyone buying this property knows what's there now or will know. They're going to do phase 2s. They're going to do geotech. They'll do a lot of work that'll determine what's there. And based upon what's there, will determine how and if they have to do a cleanup.
Thanks, Vonda. Jorge, you had a question. Would you please go ahead and ask your question? Then we can move on to
yes,
the
thank you.
ICs. Yeah,
Thank
go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to talk. Jesse, primero quiero decirte muchas gracias por traducirle a la señora. Fue una traducción muy buena. Jesse.
Muchas gracias.
Ok. Segundo, Jesse, otra pregunta en español. ¿Cuándo van a comenzar a examinar a analizar toda esa área? ¿Hay algún horario para hacerlo?
Nosotros ahora mismo estamos en la parte de lo que nosotros ya conocemos como el QAPP, que es un plan que habla de todos los controles de calidad. Que es un plan que habla de todos los controles de calidad que se van a utilizar, y luego de eso se empieza el muestreo. Yo tengo ese plan ahora mismo, estamos revisándolo. Así que con suerte, para finales de este año, principio del otro, yo espero que se esté pudiendo hacer el muestreo.
Perfecto. Y otra pregunta. Digamos que alguien compra la tierra el terreno ese, piensa construir casas. ¿No hay nada que prohíba a alguien que hagan casas o apartamentos ahí sin haber examinado el área?
Ahora mismo, como no tenemos un récord de decisión, no hay nada que prohíba o que ponga algún control adicional. Ahora, dicho eso, la forma en que funciona CERCLA, cuando una persona compra una de estas propiedades o quiere crear algo en estas propiedades, el que compra obtiene la carga, ¿verdad? Obtiene la parte negativa y se protege solamente si sigue un proceso. Y dentro de esas partes están que si es un sitio de nosotros, tiene que estar de acuerdo con lo que nosotros vamos a hacer de investigación.
Perfecto.
Y con lo que nosotros vamos a proponer de limpieza, incluyendo controles que estén ahí. De lo contrario, se absorbe todo la carga, ¿verdad? Y usualmente estamos hablando de millones de dólares.
Perfecto. Muchas gracias, Jesse.
Seguro. Déjame entonces decirle esto aquí a ellos para que ellos tengan la misma información que nosotros.
Claro, no, yo te pregunté en español para que María lo entienda.
Seguro que sí. Oye, cierto es, doña María, de nuevo, en cualquier momento hable y yo le contesto.
Gracias.
Jesse, mucho gusto de verte, Jesse.
Seguro, igual usted.
Gracias, Jorge.
Okay.
Claro, doña María.
Jorge, entonces la primera pregunta era la de, déjame tratar de recordarme. La primera pregunta era de cuándo, ¿verdad? Si uno hacer los trabajos, y la segunda de las prohibiciones. Okay.
Sí.
Okay, so I'm just going to go and translate what Jorge and I talked. So Jorge had two questions. The first one was about when are we going to start resampling? And I told him that right now I'm reviewing the QAPP and that I'm expecting that work will start happening at the end of the year or, the beginning of the next year. And then the second question was about, is there anyone preventing someone from buying the properties and putting on residential properties? And I told them that at this point, there is nothing because we have not finished the ROD. So what happens, and this is kind of related to the whole Pepsi discussion. When someone buys a property, they acquired all of the liability. And they have to do certain steps to protect themselves from the liability. And that includes cooperating with us during the investigation, when we put the remedy in place and agreeing to whatever remedy and controls we decide in the RUD too.
All right, if there aren't any more questions right now, I mean, obviously we have lots more to talk about, but we'll go ahead and move on to talking about the institutional controls.
So just to give everybody an understanding, institutional controls are instruments such as administrative and legal controls that help to minimize potential for exposure to contamination. And in this case, they were contaminated properties that were either tested and not cleaned up, or they were not tested. And so EPA was to record against the property a notice at the county clerk and recorder that would notify people before they purchased a property that they could be buying a property that had these institutional controls on them. And so currently 53, according to the documents in the 219 5-year review, I know this is not accurate, but according to that, there's 53 residential properties within OU1 that have either a notice of potential environmental condition, in other words, they are contaminated, or a notice of environmental conditions that they possibly could be. So the issue was some institutional controls were filed by property owner name and may not be found during property record search in Denver. And the recommendation was to evaluate ways to ensure the institutional controls are discoverable in the Denver property database when a title company goes to search title. And the solution was supposed to be by September 30th, 2021. These are the homes that have the institutional control on them. And these are the homes that have notice of potential contamination. And there are several of them. So would anyone, Jesse or Fonda or anyone like to address that?
Yeah, this was resolved already. I sent you the evaluation that we did and the steps we took to correct it.
How did you correct it with the county clerk and recorder?
The document tells you that I spent some time with Fonda trying to figure out what is the best way to make sure that people are informed about this.
Well, but the thing is, they're supposed to be informed by the county clerk and recorder when a title company goes in to do a title search, that they find this document that is warning people before they purchase property that they're buying a potential headache, an environmental headache. And if they don't have that notice before they buy from the title company who goes to the county clerk and recorder, then the people are not being notified potentially before they purchase. How do you know that someone's thinking about purchasing a property?
The information is in the property, in the clerk and recorder. That is the first thing. We file them by the property ID.
You refile them?
No.
I don't know what you're saying.
Let me clarify a little bit. So part of the problem was because in Colorado they have a Takings Act, which basically says you can't put it on private property. You can't put a notice on something, especially when you don't know for sure, and put a notice on a property. So what they did was the notice was based upon the current owner of the property, only under his name.
Right.
The problem happened was when certain fix and flippers bought the property for cash and didn't do a phase 1 or phase 2, they found out after the fact, then they sold the property. So that's what the problem was. What we're trying to do as the best we can is we're still working with the county clerk recorder to figure out what else we can do. But we have the list out there. We try to people contact us, but is it perfect? No. Have we caught things ahead of time? Yes. Has it caused some headaches for people? Absolutely. But unfortunately, the way the laws are set up here, because of takings laws, we were kind of, our hands were kind of tied to how we could put a notice on these properties.
So this seems to me to be a perfect opportunity to engage your community advisory group, and that we could actually come in and we could help, like, go door to door or help out with those kinds of notifications and talk with people. We have somebody here in our,
Bridget, you're on mute because
yeah.
Rachel's talking.
And Rachel, the thing is that we don't need to go door to door. The notifications are sent every year to the property owner and to the residents, so that in case there are renters, that the renter knows that there is a potential or an actual condition there. And then
That's not the issue, Jesse. Rachel, just a minute. The issue is that people who are putting offers on properties and going under contract, then the normal course would be the title work would go in, the title company would go and do a search of the public records, and then up would come on the preliminary title report a notice that that address has a potential problem, an environmental problem. And before they purchase, then they would have the opportunity to say, to get out of the deal. Now, you can send letters to tenants, you can send letters to owners, but unless you have a crystal ball and you know when people are thinking about buying a property or they somehow know to call you, there is not a system in place as far as I can tell, unless you have gone in and re-recorded these notices on the property address and not just the owner.
the Denver Clicker Recorder does not record information on property address. As Fonda mentioned, there's a couple of things in the way that we could not go around. And this is the solution that was found.
What was the solution?
Sending out the yearly letters to everyone to notify them.
Well, yes, but you're not notifying the potential borrower, the potential buyers. Those are the people that need to be notified before they conclude the transaction, before they put their money down and buy the place, that they're buying an environmental hazard, potentially. And that's the part that's missing here. And you guys were supposed to come up with a solution by September 30th of 2021. And I don't think you've come up with a solution. And I'm very concerned that these properties, I went and looked at all these properties to see how many had changed hands. And a lot of them have changed hands recently. And were all of those potential purchasers notified before they closed the transaction that there was a problem?
If the people,
so here's the thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you just explain what's the problem here. Right. You're not agreeing with the solution that we put in place.
Well, that's because you're notifying the seller and a tenant. You're not notifying a potential borrower, potential buyer. And that's the purpose of the institutional control. One of them is to notify potential purchasers that they're buying a pig in a poke.
We have several constraints, and this was a solution that we found that works best for the site.
Well, the solution is you're not notifying the potential borrowers, potential buyers. You're notifying the owner and the tenant, not the potentials. And that's the problem that was addressed in this 5-year review. So we don't have to beat a horse to death. But I'm just
can we go
Bridget,
ahead and have
do you have a solution
Can
that
I
we
say
have that can go that besides going around the Takings Act law?
listen, it's not me to come up with a solution. It's up for the EPA to come up with a solution that was noted for the problem in the 5-year review. And it's a big problem.
Bridget, can I say something?
Hold on, Joan. I
Okay,
really
thank
want
you.
Yadira to weigh in on this as a person in the affected area. So we'll have Yadira make comment and question, and then because I think it's really important to hear like what she can do, what her remediation is. Go ahead, Yadira, and then Joan will get to you after that.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah.
No problem.
So the question that I have is that, I totally understand what Bridget is talking about warning the people before purchasing a property. And there has to be some kind of a system in place that could warn the people that this could be a potential contaminated area that they're moving in, that they should probably do some kind of testing. My question would be then, if in some creative way we could find some kind of a solution for that, who would clean up that area then? Who would be responsible for cleaning up that area, or any of these addresses that are being shown here that have maybe contaminated land? Who would then clean that up?
At this point, this is the responsibility of the owner of the property, or they could make that part of the transaction. The cleanup opportunities, the last time they were given was in 2014. Yes.
Mhm.
So at this point, it's on them.
So even if
to
they
offer
do
the
know, it doesn't really, even if we do come with a creative solution on how to notify the people, then they would have to invest their own money in cleaning up this site, or knowing how to clean up a contaminated area. There wasn't no other strategic form of those. I mean, going back and knowing that those pieces of land, when the cleaning was offered, that these houses did not get cleaned up, there isn't no way for that to be continued to be offered to these lands or these places.
No, we offered them 3 or 4 times, and the owners said no. So at that point, the funding that was provided for it was closed pretty much. The process was done. And yeah, this is why we have institutional controls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it doesn't, I mean, let's just say that they cleaned one area, but then they didn't get permission for the other area. Does it even matter that they clean the one area if the other area is contaminated? Won't they just eventually both get cleaned up?
When we went in to clean a property, we clean up the property.
Yeah.
The entire property is cleaned up, not a part of it.
I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, when we did a cleanup, the whole property was sampled, and if it's above action levels, the whole property gets cleaned up. They didn't do a part of it. They did the entire property.
And would that be like the front yard plus the backyard, or were they only doing the front yard?
They did the front yard and the backyard. Now, what you may be referring to is, we did have an individual who was going to be, that happened just last year, where they're going to be doing a remodel, and they had to excavate the soil in the backyard, but they didn't do it at that time because of the remodeling happening, and they knew that they're going to be taken out as part of that. But if it was part of the Superfund cleanup, the entire yard was cleaned up, not just the front yard or backyard. Front and back was cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what's been happening is that as people are finding out that these houses have these notices on them, they've come to me or to Fonda, and they've contracted the services of environmental professionals to do the investigation, and a couple of them will have to do the cleanup too.
So is there any way that we could, that I know, I understand exactly what it is that you're saying about how it got offered, when it got offered. There's still the rejection of those properties. There's still them properties that are there. There's still the concern. There's the contamination is still there. And if it had gotten approved at that point in time that it needed to be cleaned up, and just because the owner said no, isn't there any way that we could ask for additional funding for them particular spots, to have that funding available for them slots when they become available, or when it needs to happen? I'm concerned because I'm, like I said, I've voiced many times, I'm a renter in the unit that I am living in. And I'm just afraid that what if the owner, and it's not just my unit, there's a few units that he owns. I just got told he owns 7 properties in this area. And so if he gave a no to my property and the other properties that are sitting in my block, then he probably gave a no to all of the 7 rest of the properties. And I know that he's not going to pay out of pocket to clean it out. So, if you found that the cleanup was necessary during that time, why couldn't we still continue to hold that responsibility in getting these properties cleaned up? Because the contamination is there, and that's what we were trying to solve.
The funds are no longer available to clean it up. That's just the way that it works. Once we finish a portion, the funds are no longer available. That's why we went in 3 times to ask these owners.
Yeah. Y no hay manera de buscar alguna otra opción para que estas propiedades tengan solución, o simplemente nada más.
simplemente no hay otra opción. Fonda y yo hemos tenido esta misma conversación, si hay alguna otra opción, y realmente no hay ninguna otra opción que tengamos.
Eso es triste.
Por eso es que fuimos 3 veces, para que pudieran...
Pues sí. Pues sí, Jessy, pero yo tengo 16 años viviendo en la casa. Entonces, si en esas 3 veces ustedes fueron con el dueño de mi casa en esas 3 veces y el dueño dijo, no, todavía soy el dueño y todavía digo que no, porque no quiero saber si me van a cobrar o va a ser un tax cuando yo venda o lo que haya de haber sido. Pero si él dijo que no, entonces quiere decir de que la tierra de estas 7 propiedades que son del dueño no están limpiadas, va a ser lo mismo, entonces no solucionó el problema. Y yo entiendo que usted dijo, no hay fondos, ya no hay más fondos, ya no hay más fondos, pero es una situación, no sé si usted entiende la palabra, pero es una situación muy desgraciada, inoportuna, tal vez a lo mejor para usar mejores palabras.
No, yo entiendo claramente lo que me está diciendo. El problema está en la forma en que se asignan los fondos. La persona no se dio, y parte de enviar la notificación al dueño y a la residencia para que su preocupación, ¿sabe? Estoy viviendo en una casa contaminada.
Sí.
Pues para que usted lo sepa, para que el dueño no se quede con la información y no se la pase, para que usted esté bien pendiente y en el caso de que el dueño no quisiera hacer nada más, pues saliera. Usted pudiera pues tomar una mejor decisión. Y eso es lo que hace el control institucional. Por eso es que se dividió de las 2 formas, para asegurarnos que todos los que pudieran estar expuestos tuvieran la información.
Quisiera saber cómo se le envió, qué era lo que decía la información que se le envió, como qué era lo que decía la carta que se le envió para decirle que tal vez a lo mejor esto no iba a ser algo que él tenía que pagar. ¿Se podría saber?
Yo estoy seguro que yo puedo conseguir una de las cartas que se utilizó y buscarlo. Tengo que buscar, ¿sabes? Tengo que sentarme a buscar. Y doña Yadira, déjeme apuntar aquí su nombre.
A mí sí me gustaría saber qué lenguaje fue el que se utilizó para comunicarse con él, porque si es un lenguaje un poco confuso o que el dueño tal vez a lo mejor no estaba consciente de que esto iba a ser gratuito, que iba a ser gratis para él.
Iba a ser gratis. Era claro que era gratis. Eso sí, eso era claro que era gratis en varias de las opciones.
Sí.
¿Por qué no lo hicieron? Sí, y déjeme decirle un poco más. Ese no es un problema único de aquí.
Sí.
Es un problema que ocurre en todos los sitios que tenemos situaciones similares. Me dirá Sánchez y Sánchez.
Sí.
Yarira, I don't have any graceful way to transition out of this because I understood some of that, but not all of it. So I can't like capture us and move on to the next thing. Do you want to kind of summarize that for us? And then we'll have Joan ask her question and then we can, and we can kind of figure out like in the future to try to, this needs time, I think, more conversation. And we can kind of strategize what that looks like. Will you please?
Basically what I was just trying to ask Senior Jesse was there a different way that these properties could be added for cleanup, but because there is no more funding available and it doesn't seem like that's going to be an option nowhere near the future, then those properties just are not going to get cleaned up and it'll be responsibility for whoever owns them in the future, even though that there's this large amount of properties that are not being cleaned. And so my question then was, can I see the language of the letter that was sent out to the owner to see if possibly maybe in some sort of way the owner thought that this was going to affect him in some kind of way in the long run, where he was going to have to pay for it some way or another. And so El Señor Jesse said that he will try to find me something of that nature, so that way I could just maybe get a peace of mind of how this letter was sent out or what the letter said as it was sent out, to see if maybe by any chance, because like my property, probably there's plenty others.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that synopsis. That makes sense. That's a perfect it's perfectly, yeah, appropriate. And whenever that materializes, I'd like to see what your thoughts are on it, Yadira. Joan, you want to go ahead and ask your question, then we'll move on to someone talking about NOLA today. Or NOLA talking today. Go ahead.
Well, let me just do it real quick. This is a Superfund site that we're talking about. OU1, Superfund, national. And we had many homes were supposedly sampled, and from the research I see, there were 4,500 or more homes sampled. We've never seen a list of any of the sampling of the 4,500 homes. We have a list in 2017, I'm sorry, where that was the final with the Army Corps of Engineers, et cetera. And there's a list at the very back of the report that lists all of the properties that were sampled supposedly, and the test results and the disposition of the soil. So we're missing this 4,500 homes that were supposedly tested. We have Mary Hernandez informed me that there were lots of basements with dirt, and never did they ask her or lots of some different people that were living in that area. They had dirt basements, and no dirt was tested. Dust was not sampled inside any of these homes, and they're being sampled at the Pueblo smelter site. So no dust was sampled to determine not just what was in the outside on the soil, how much showed up in the house with dust, et cetera. And there were letters sent out to renters supposedly, and they were supposed to learn how to teach themselves to protect themselves from any possible contamination in a Superfund site where EPA said that it was, after a period of time, it's their responsibility. There's no money for it. They didn't EPA never even sent a letter out in Spanish. So they just did that recently, putting it out in Spanish. And, you know, I want to say, I think that EPA could help teach the CAG, not I did it. You know, that's the one thing about citizens now. Many are researching, they're looking for facts, not just trust me, I took care of it. So, and I believe the city of Denver should have been on top of this as well. If the city of Denver, or even our city council people, if this happens again or continues to happen, which there are other sites, that should be reported. This public should understand how this works. So I'd like the EPA to help teach certainly anyone. The last thing I have to say, I just learned something that I didn't understand, that EPA has something called a unilateral order inside of a Superfund site. And a unilateral order says they will clean it up. Why should any of those citizens, even now, have to clean it up themselves? You're saying, well, they just didn't answer us. Well, if it didn't send a letter out in Spanish, or you didn't have all those people that were renting and still rent there, I do believe, again, we should teach the CAG, show us the month, show us how you did it, show us so that we can teach future people. Because right now, 22 years later, you're saying, oh, I fixed it finally in 2019. So, you know, I do believe that Yadida has some issues, and I'd like to go back and see again. Here's the reports, 4,500 homes. Did we test basements? There are a lot of questions that are still outstanding, but Yadida, I think I'd still like to see any test results done on that property so that she can feel safe that the letter came in, she had her property sampled, she's leaving with a clean mind in her future. But unilateral order, I'd like EPA to talk about where they performed unilateral orders and cleaned it up and demanded from those owners, not, well, we sent you a letter and you didn't pay attention to it, so we're just going to leave the contamination there, that you could, in a Superfund site, authorize cleanup.
Let me respond to a couple of things, Joan. We have a database, which I gave you guys a copy of the database of all the properties that were sampled and that were above action levels, and it did not allow us to access. Also a database of the people that were sampled and were not sampled because they did not give access. We also gave you the database of every single property in the area that was sampled. So I'm not sure where you're coming from on that, but we have provided that information to you. Secondly, the unilateral order has to do with has to do with businesses and stuff like that. A private property here in Colorado, you cannot, I'll give you an example. If someone has water rights, I cannot tell them you can't use your water. It goes under a takings law. Same thing over here. I cannot go into a private residence property and make them give us access to either sample and or clean up. Until that law is changed, Superfund can't do it, we can't do it. So that's why we do the best we can to notify that. And that's why also we put those notices the best we could was to put it under the person's name. We couldn't put it on the property that fell under the takings law. So is it perfect? No. You know, we are open to suggestions of what else we can do. We send out letters. We do it every year. We do it in Spanish now and English to the owners and to the renters. If you got a solution that we can do within laws, I'm all ears.
22 years later,
I think the next time
it's
that you
22
do
years
this,
later.
you
I have nothing more to say on that
long
subject.
Time.
Sorry.
It's not like it's 22 years later. It took a long time. It was 2014 before we finished the cleanup. We said people certified letters, we went door to door. We can't make some of these people do that. Sure, 2014 and now we're talking 7 years later. Yes, we've done certain things as far as that. We did what we thought is the best we could do. If you guys have solutions, I'm all ears. Please help us.
Wanda, please come to us and ask us whenever you do send things out to our community. And I mean, that's what we're here for, is to help
The
facilitate
CAG wasn't
those
there back in 2000. The CAG wasn't around back in 2014.
When we did become, functional, that would have been a good time to engage as well at the beginning. So there are many years past. And so I feel like from moving forward, any letters that you send to our community, any communication that you have for our community, anytime you need our community to provide input, this is the place to come and grab us, and we'll bring people in.
No one said we're not going to do that.
Please do that. And those actual requests are helpful. And
of course we will.
Thank you. So let's move on to the next conversation about some of the, I don't know if anybody got this flyer and what sort of ramifications it has, but essentially it's the National Western Stock Show, and there's a lot of stuff going up over there, and we're trying to kind of see what's going on. So I believe we have somebody to talk about it with us tonight. It's kind of a special surprise guest. Nola?
Hi.
Hey. Go ahead, Nola.
Hi.
Hey.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see you. A lot of you I've met before, some I haven't, but nice to see everyone. And is it possible for me to share?
Yes.
I can show, I'm from the Global Swansea Coalition, Organizing for Health and Housing Justice. Dita is also part of the coalition. Maria is also on the call. Who else? Is Angela on the call? So please, everyone, feel free to chime in when you're wanting to. And Maria, I can translate for you if need be. Okay, I'm gonna share. So our coalition has been working on a proposal for the National Western site. This is so the city recently, at the beginning of 2021, dropped the P3, the public-private partnership proposal that they had on the table and we're moving forward with, which was something that we were glad about because we were not supportive of P3 either. But that was the way that they were going to develop out the triangle, which is the phases 3, 4, and 5 of the, here's another picture. Phases 1 and 2 are over here of the National Western, and that's the CSU buildings, the stockyards, the river that's goes over to Globeville. So those phases are already funded with the original $765 million and $100 million that they got from the state. 765 was from the 2C vote. That's all the lodgers tax and car rental taxes and so on. So this project has already received $865 million worth of public funding. Now it's at the beginning of the year, the P3 dropped it, and the way that the triangle was going to be developed was kind of unknown. And I'm just talking about recent history. We can go back to 2013 and all that if anybody wants to, but or even further back. I think I see Dennis Gallagher on the call, and he might have some insight.
Yeah.
But just wanted to note here that this is the triangle. So here's the Leary Swanson neighborhoods. This is Brighton Boulevard. Down here is the Coliseum and the Coliseum parking lot, which is the OU2 that I know you all are talking about. This is the whole triangle. This is the train tracks. There's the existing 1909 arena, which is where the kind of center of the sexual events happen now. So what's in the bond proposal, which we did not know about until about 2 weeks ago, that is funding the 1909 arena to become a public market, to be renovated to become a public market, and then $160 million to go towards building a new 10,000 seat arena. So those were the buildings that they wanted to have funded through the P3 that now they're asking for nearly $200 million of public funding from the general obligation bond to go towards those facilities. There's our position on this at this point in time is that now is not the right time to fund an arena for a lot of different reasons. The public and the community have been asking for a priority around affordable housing. And so funding an arena kind of seems like a slap in the face. There's a lot of responses from the city and from Brad Buchanan, the director of the authority, to saying, this is the economic engine and this is what's going to bring benefits to the community and da-da-da-da-da. It's also what's going to displace more and more people from the community. If there's not stability measures put in place, if affordable housing isn't created, remembering that almost all homes in Global Leary Swansea are non-deed restricted, meaning they're going up in price. So we've seen over the last 9 years, property values have gone up 550%. So it's just crazy what's happening. And as soon as a bond like this passes, and people know, it's like as they say, they smell the gasoline, and prices are going to go up even more. Developers, land speculation, all of that is going to go up. So that's our fear, and that's why we're not supporting this. I think in the long term, if there was a plan for the triangle, which there is not, they don't even know where the arena would go on this site. They don't even know, is it going to demo the Coliseum? Is it going to demo the existing expo hall? There's not funding to demo either one of those buildings or clean up any of the site. So it's pretty frustrating from our perspective to have, it's kind of like, to use a Western related phrase to say, putting the cart before the horse of like, there's this, it might potentially make sense to fund these, but right now at this point in time, there aren't the community commitments in place. They've been saying since 2013 that we should have a community benefits agreement. We don't have that. And this proposal right here that I'm showing is actually what we're asking for is reparations for the homes that were homes were taken, directly displaced. And we're asking for reparations for that, both for that and for the overall long-term history of this site, that the land becomes community owned, managed by, ideally by a community land trustee colectiva that could help to maintain the community's desires and long-term vision in perpetuity, forever. So this is kind of what their existing master plan looks like at the triangle. But part of the obligation of the authority is to finish the master plan in the triangle. It was not finished during the process, although the 2015 master plan was done. There was a clause saying it wasn't finished, but what it looks like in their plans are these huge big box arenas. And what we're saying is we want a neighborhoodization of this area. We want we want to feel the neighborhood in the campus. And I think there's been lessons learned around the area campus development. You know, there's a lot of different things, but I could keep going all day. So we don't want big box arenas. What we want is neighborhoodization. We want housing. Long story short, to get to kind of what you all are talking about, this Coliseum site is really critical overall. It's about 30 acres. We haven't been able to have a conversation as a community of really what could happen to the Coliseum. So what we're asking for is a comprehensive planning process that involves the city, but is community led. And we've actually contracted an urban planner at Hector, which is a known architect. They do a lot of advocacy plans for communities that are working to show their vision to you know, big institutions like the city and so on. And so we're already working with them to initiate the process of the planning of the triangle overall. But this part down here, most likely what we would like to see here, because there's not a whole lot of open space otherwise, maybe by the train station up here or along Brighton Boulevard might be other places for housing, but there are gonna, like, we have to face the reality that there probably are going to be some types of facilities for tourism, because that's what the National Western Center is set out to do. But we would like to see, you know, really this part down here it is one of the best places for housing. So we really want to talk about that with you all in relation to the cleanup of this site. Sorry, that was a lot of information, and anyone else from the coalition that wants to chime in.
Nola, I just probably wanted just to add that one of the things that we wanted to bring up was that site that you're talking about, the parking lot of the Coliseum, and to work with the CAG to see how we could clean that, work with the CAG that works with the EPA or the CDPHE to see how we could eventually clean that up for housing.
Well, if we do a cleanup right now, just to kind of jump in here a little bit, it's probably going to be for unrestricted use, which means they're going to remove everything they have on there. So allow that. But, you know, we can't dictate, the EPA and the state cannot dictate to Denver what to do with their land. That kind of falls outside of our purview. And that's a meeting you're going to have with, you're going to have to go to your city council people to be able to talk with them and to be able to talk to Denver, because what you have is a great proposal. However, it's something outside of the purview of what EPA and the state can do as far as the Superfund site.
Christine?
Yeah. Hi, Nola. I wanted to, first of all, thank GES for bringing this to council and making a plan, an alternate plan, and because in my estimation, the whole NWC project is falling to the floor and they don't know what they're doing. But so it's a great opportunity. But I have 2 points that I'd like you to consider as you move forward. One is that I think, and I talked to Ian about this today briefly,
Christine, you just went on blank.
You're silent, Christine. We've lost her.
She froze.
Christine, maybe she'll come back. I'll text her because she always has incredibly good points.
No, now I know. I want to know what she was going to say.
I know. I'm going to text her right now.
I think we've shifted a little bit from being completely opposed to saying these things should really be in place before arenas are funded publicly. And that's one of those things we think should be a plan for the cleanup.
We should,
among other things.
no, we should probably have time with you and with Chuck and a few others to talk about the contamination that's under that site,
Yeah,
because it is incredibly contaminated and they have not even yet figured out what the contamination is. They might just be looking EPA for lead and arsenic, but there are many other contaminants in that site. So
Nola, are you all already, is there any kind of public event or community event you're already planning? Or should we maybe do some quick, in a couple of weeks, explainer with some of the experts here to talk about it? And yourself and Yadira and anyone else?
To
Quick
talk
question,
about
Bridget.
the details of the pollution there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the triangle?
Yes.
The Coliseum and the triangle.
Okay.
Would that be useful? Should we go ahead and collaborate on that to try to get something together in a couple of weeks to explain to people, to explain to folks? Is there some timeliness that we need to be aware of?
would be great. I'd like to hear that.
Okay. Christine, you have your hand up. You're
Yeah,
back.
I
Yay!
know. So the second half of what I was going to talk about, which may not really be within CAG's purview, but I think it's important to raise at some point, is that because of the money forces which are on the side for promoting this bond issue, I think that we need to not keep it a GES issue, even though GES is the one that's raised it. And I really think we need to figure out a way to make sure that residents throughout Denver know and understand that they are all being had by this project. It really, it's not just a GES issue. And if we keep going that way, I can just hear Roger Sherman and those guys promoting it and winning. So I think it's important to think about, and I can talk to you about that at another point, but.
Yeah, I'm gonna put both the link where this little visual is, and then our we've been working on an equitable development planner that talks overall about the background and ways forward doing more equitable development. So I'll put the link for that in the chat and also put my email. I don't know if this is the right place to talk about all the details or
Right.
strategies. So please just reach out and we can talk about that. But I think I see Rachel had a question about housing the unhoused. I think likely that is what will happen if this pandemic continues. Instead of having events, it will end up being a homeless shelter again. So yeah, we're also very interested in looking at very low income housing that could be working with to help people that are unhoused find housing or transitional housing. So this a lot of the things that we're dealing with in overall in Denver, like you're saying, Christine, this is public land funded by public dollars, right? We should be able to do the things that we're talking about in all these other places. The council people keep telling us as we're trying to advocate for, council or community benefits agreements or some sort of equity agreement with private developers. Oh, well, you can't do that on private land. You can't do that. Wait till there's public land. Well, here's 60 acres of public land that's undetermined right now. So let's do some of the stuff that we're all talking about when we bring up equity and all the so many needs that the city has that we could be addressing here, including reparations to marginalized populations in GES and outside of GES, that really need reparations, that we need to repair a lot of harm that has been done, via redlining, via so many harmful policies, especially around housing, in our city's past and in this country's past.
No, have you spoken at all with Candy Cidabacca or Debbie Ortega? Because obviously those are the council persons and those are the ones you have your ear to, because, in this CAG, as far as the state and EPA is concerned, this is outside of our purview. And I appreciate what you're doing. Don't get me wrong. It's just that without Denver's involvement, this is all no. This is all nothing.
Yeah, Fonda, we're talking to all the council people right now. We are talking to the National Western Authority. We are talking to the city and the National Western office, mayor's office of the National Western, or like all these different players. We're talking to all of them.
And there, if I can just add a point here, the battle, there's a similar battle going on at the Park Hill Golf Course. And you should go to every event that Park Hill Golf Course has and pitch your points, because it's a thread right to the Park Hill Golf Course to keep Park Hill Golf Course open space. That'll be on the ballot in November. This is very similar to what you're talking about. It's a similar theme about how the city has goofed up all this stuff and we're short on park space, and we've sort of let the mountains spoil us. We think we've got the mountains, but they'd love to sell off even the mountain parks if they had their way. So just a thought on that. And that's another group that you can open up to who are angry as you are about how things are going.
Thanks, Dennis. And Fonda and Jesse are welcome to exit at any point now. We're kind of going into community
No
time.
I just want to make one last point.
Wait. I would like to add something before Fonda and Jesse leave.
Oh, yes, sure. Go ahead.
This is Angela.
Oh, Angela,
and
hey.
I have been shoulder to shoulder with the GES Coalition. I live in Groville. I'm sick and tired of all the shit that the National Western has thrown at us for decades. But Fonda, one of the things the fact that NOLA has come to this group to talk is because this group, the CAG, has supported the GES community for years. And we're here to ask them for their continued support with what it is that we're doing. And I understand that the city and the state and the feds, you're all separate and y'all have to do your own thing. But I just want you guys to understand that this CAG, this advisory group, has supported this community and stood up for this community and has advocated for this community. So we're here to tell them about what it is that we're going through and how we need to continue to have their support for us. It's very important for us. I think it's very important for them. Everyone in this group is an activist. We want what's better for our community. And I just want that to be on the table for both you and Jesse to understand. And now if you guys want to leave, you can. But I'm not done talking. And so the other thing that I want to add is that one of the things that it's disgusting and insulting to me that this bond is even on the table for this community, because we don't have a single damn thing here. We don't have a grocery store. We are a food desert. We don't have a laundromat. We don't have anything to serve our community. And we were told in a phone call, well, in a Zoom, that the National Western wants to be a global agricultural hub. And I called out Liz Adams and I said, how insulting is that to this community that you want to be a global agricultural hub in the middle of a fucking food desert where we have to go so far to get food, to buy food to feed our families. That's bullshit. Now I'm done. Thank you.
You can have the rest of the time. It's all good.
And
Thank you so much.
If I can just add, before this is over, the proponents will show children with horses. And this is what you're going to vote for. You've got to vote for the horses and the children. These poor children are going to be able to meet some horses. And it's going to just be a tearjerker. And we're all going to be in tears during the campaign because it's going to pull at our heartstrings. Got to be strong. Vote to keep Park Hill open space as well. And then the developers have even put something on the ballot that'll allow them to develop 60%, and they say we're going to leave 40% open space. Bovis excrementum, as we say in Latin. Terrible, terrible. And so I hope you vote that one down. And even Mayor Webb and Penfield Tate are all for keeping the agreement with the Park Hill Golf Course as open space. I'm meeting with them, see if we can't get a campaign going. So just keep your eye on the prize.
Thank you, Dennis. I wanted to say, Nola, that Hancock building a 10,000 seat arena for cows when the cattle business is dying on the vine for lack of water.
Yeah.
And his frat boy chums want an arena for the Olympics that they're still banging the pots for.
I know.
An Olympic that would bankrupt Denver and people would just get sick. This pandemic is not going to end quickly. So
they're all mad at Governor Polis for suggesting we have meatless days. I grew up with meatless days every Friday. And have fish. That's where I learned how to love fish. But anyway, so let's keep our eye on the prize. We can defeat this. So I think we can win this one.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more? I think Fonda, you're welcome to leave now. I think Jesse's already exited. Any more questions for Nola?
Fonda, did you have one more thing to say, Fonda, before leaving?
Well, I was just going to talk about, here's what you guys are up against, okay? I'm going to talk to you guys, not as a regulator, but as a person who deals in the brownfields world and redevelopment world. And it comes down to this, unfortunately. To clean up both properties, especially just the property for over at the Coliseum, it's going to be tens of millions of dollars. So to be able to turn that around and make something, Denver wants to be able to have investment on their property in the sense that, and I'm not saying what you guys, don't get me wrong, I think Noah's position is honorable to say the least. Something is needed here, but it still comes down to economics. Someone who's going to buy that property is going to spend a lot of money on it to develop it. And they're going to want to put the best and highest use of it to be able to get the return back. And that's what you guys are up against. It's big money.
This is big money, big money.
Does anyone know the answer to the question of can general obligation bond dollars be used for cleanup?
I don't know. You'd have to get a city attorney's opinion. Maybe Candy. I watched last night the council discussing all this, and Candy Cedabaka was the best I've seen her. She had great questions, and she more or less dissed the stock show, and which I thought was pretty courageous because it's the big money.
Is.
And I mean, I was way back. I was even for it way back when we had the revenue stream for the stock show, and I didn't want them to go to Aurora. Aurora wanted to steal it away from us, and but Candy is she's sort of someone who could help you find out the answer to that.
What I can
the answer will be whatever the mayor wants because he appoints the city attorney. But maybe,
I can answer that for you guys real quick.
I'd say
the state has what's called a hazard subsidy relief fund, and that's basically tipping fees from all the landfills. You have to tip into that, and there's a fund set up. And there's X amount of millions of dollars set up there. They use that fund for Superfund cleanup sites because Denver is a PRP and they're part of that. They also fund part of those because they have dads and stuff like that. They're going to be using the HSRF fund and loaning money from that to pay for the cleanup, because what they're basically going to be saying is we're going to be paying you our tipping fees. And we're using those tipping fees towards the cleanup. So long story short, I believe they're going to use the HSRF fund for that cleanup so they don't have to go through council for approval because it's based upon fees that they're collecting already.
And the idea of reparations for the former residents is a hard one to explain. And have you gotten much feedback on that? That would be something to check with Candy about too. That would be it's a hard issue to explain.
Yeah, and the mayor is on a council of mayors talking about reparations, and so we're hoping that would be something that he would be a little more responsive to. But how you're defining reparations and so on, I mean, the first step of a reparative process would be to start to tell truths. right? About the history of that site and that land. And I don't know if the National Western Stock Show, the National Western Authority Board is ready for that, is willing to do that and ready to do that.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm like, there's individuals like Lucia Guzman. We met with Lucia and Ernest House, who are on the authority board, you know, the only people of color on the board. And they, other than John Sepian, and they are you know, they're interested and they want to talk about it, but they don't have much power. Like when it comes down to it, they don't get to they have one vote, and they may or may not use that vote. So yeah, it's a little.
Yeah, it's a tough sell.
Hey,
Yeah,
guys,
I
I'm
think
gonna
they
call
need
it a night, okay? Good night.
Okay.
Thank you, Fanda.
Rene Sundike, Karisto,
Kalinikta.
Kalinikta,
There you
Kalos Iltate.
go.
So, well, I think I've got to go meet a neighbor on a fence issue. So, but it's sure great to see everybody. This was a wonderful meeting and I learned a lot and reminded me of the day when I went with my father and my uncles and to see the Grant smelter be blown down. And it took 3 days to tear it down. They thought they had it done. And I used to ride my bike over there in Globeville around all those places. I hope I haven't picked up some horrible disease that I might have lumbering in my system because I rode my bike around all there and met all the people and all the Slavic people who were the Germans from Russia and all those Eastern Europeans who the city treated like dirt too. So, but anyway, joy to be with you. And remember, vote to keep Park Hill open space, open space. It'll be on the ballot. Doesn't have a number yet, but I'll let you know.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. We'll see you.
Thanks, Dennis.
Yeah, great to see everybody.
Okay. So it sounds like we need to figure out some kind of explainer, something. And I put in the chat about Colorado State University. They're building a new campus there, the Spark campus. And so it might be useful to have a representative from them. Maybe they have I'm just like, well, first and foremost, their whole thing is about agriculture. It's about energy of the future. Like these are the buildings that they're creating. And they're like Temple Brandon, they do like they're autistic and they're like this expert on how to like kill animals humanely. Anyway, it's a whole thing. And so it's like the Temple Brandon, like agriculture, or, livestock thing. Anyway, so yeah, we can, Nola, we should work together to figure this out, and get some community involved and let them know what's going on. And yeah, they're gonna just build new just shit that we don't need, not even a little bit.
So Nola might be interested, it's getting kind of late, but Nola might be interested in our guest that's coming in September, Dr. Monica Ramirez Andrade. And she is from the University of Arizona, and she does community-based programs to develop citizen scientists to collect information about rainwater and about vegetables and about arsenic and lead. She's a Superfund person. Anyway, I'll send you the links, but you might be very interested.
Well, and we could talk about, mostly we just need to tailor. I need to be able to provide something to Monica about like kind of our guiding questions from our community. So I can always compile that from folks through email and, that kind of thing. But, oh yeah, that's a great idea, Nola.
If anybody can stand one more minute, I have a video about her. It's just a couple minutes and talks about.
The AAAS Early Career Award for Public Engagement with Science recognizes early career scientists who demonstrate excellence in their public engagement with science activities. This year, we honor Monica Ramirez Andriota, Assistant Professor of the Department of Soil, Water, and Environmental Science at the University of Arizona. She is honored for her innovative approach to engaging communities on environmental health-related problems and working collaboratively with them to research and solve these problems. Residents of disadvantaged communities in Arizona and across the nation are disproportionately affected by environmental problems like pollution, water scarcity, and food insecurity. Ramirez has been heading up citizen science programs for years in an effort to be a steward of the environment and to help these disadvantaged communities. This includes 2 major programs she launched, Garden Roots and Project Harvest. In addition, she's made her science culturally relevant, accessible, and responsive to these communities' concerns. She also advocates for environmental education programs in which communities, organizations, government, and academic stakeholders build meaningful partnerships and cultivate opportunities for informal science education. In her research, Ramirez focuses on the effects of exposure to environmental contaminants, with special attention on plant soil systems to improve soil, air, and water quality. And she tightly integrates her research with her outreach and public engagement efforts. Finally, her work is international as she engages communities on both sides of the US-Mexico border. In her public engagement efforts, Ramirez has been a true innovator in the ways she's promoted dialogue and collaboration between scientists and communities affected by her work. Monica Ramirez Andriota.
So
yeah, she does. We will get interpretation, and we've actually. She's open to doing the presentation in Spanish and then have it translated for English speakers.
Personally and professionally, my goal is to democratize science. Science is for all, and we're all scientists in our own way. If we look at what causes environmental injustice, they're tied to income, minority status, technical awareness, and understanding. And so you can address injustices through the democratization of science. Project Harvest is a citizen science project. The motivation of all of us is, what is the quality of harvested rainwater? Are there pollutants in harvested rainwater? If so, do they get trapped in soils? Could they accumulate in plants? And could those pollutants affect our health? It's critical to work with the communities that live near those sources because they're making daily observations. Project Harvest is operating within 4 different communities throughout the state of Arizona, neighboring active or legacy mining or resource extraction sites. We know that these community members are collecting harvested rainwater in areas neighboring sources of waste. Buenos dias, Mr. Jimenez.
How are you? Long time no see.
I know, it's great to see you, Fred.
Oh, good. Good to see you.
The more that we work together in the scientific investigations, the more that paid professional researchers as well as community members will learn. This is great. You have it labeled.
Right, here's my rain barrel. I have it here.
And they're intrinsically motivated to learn more about their environment, not only to protect their own health, their family's health.
This is just one plant.
But perhaps they want to make changes to how pollution is managed. When working with communities that neighbor waste, you could imagine them being labeled as like a contaminated community. On the flip side, there's so much that they have in terms of their own resiliency.
It's not to point fingers, but it's to find the truth and to produce solutions for people. It really offered me the way to answer to my inmost concerns. I mean, did I really do well raising my kids here? Is there going to be any health issues for us or for them because we chose this community to work in? When we moved here, we knew that there were mines here. I think it's very important that I will get the results of the soils in my backyard.
We've got around 1,100 samples. We just are.
So I have to go, let's see, I have to go. But I'm very excited about her coming, and Rachel is very excited about it. And I think the whole community could get a boost from this and participating in these projects, and she gets funding for them at any rate. So
Yeah, I want Yadira and I to, and whoever else is open to possibly get trained on how she does these programs in her community.
yes,
And then spread it out and, spread it here and try to bring it here as well. And look for grants and talk with her about sort of the academic things that she's been plugging into in different, maybe the NSF or, yeah.
she's everywhere. She gets funding from the National Science Foundation, EPA. She got awards from EPA. She's, I think she has a lot to tell us. And she can say it all in Spanish. Anyway, so thank you all. Christine, thank you for coming all the way from Wisconsin.
Thank you, Christine.
And Joan, thank you for all your insight, in NOLA. And Jackie, welcome back.
Good to see everybody.
Yes, and Yadira and Marie and Rachel. You're all precious.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Go ahead, Jack. All right, goodbye, everyone. I will reach out to you, Nola, and we'll coordinate and I'll kind of disseminate information. Okay, sound good? And Christine, did you want to be part of that as well? Or anybody else want to be, Yadira, you want to be a part of it?
I think it would be, I think I'm interested in a slightly different way of helping NOLA. So,
okay.
but I'll talk to you.
Oh,
about
good.
that. I mean, I want to see, maybe it'll help. Okay, we'll chat. Let's get a smaller meeting together on that.
Please, yes, because we need a lot of support outside of GES for this.
Okay, so
yeah.
we'll get that.
We need a full strategy on that.
Okay, we can do
so,
that.
Wait, should we chat about it, have another meeting on it, or do emails, or?
Well, do we want to schedule our meeting right? Yeah, Bridget, go ahead and go. Please do.
Yeah.
I know you need to get going.
Well,
We could go ahead and figure out a day.
I would like to be included in the meeting because I think Christine's point and Nola's point that we need to generate energy outside of GES, and it would be so easy to do. I think that's important. And also that we are able to collaborate with you on what we found out about the pollution and so forth. Coming, dear. I have to go to dinner.
Get out of there. Okay, but I know that NOLA, I know you're swamped on what you're doing with council. So I'm not sure how to go about this, but Yadira and